big stink. And so we're now asking the governor to veto it. So interestingly enough, she's taking her time on this, right? Kind of interesting.
I think it's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be.
I have to agree with you. I mean, into politics, but what the left turn says, you're on the right track.
Yeah, you're not alone in thinking that.
On a lighter note, you know, I don't believe it is going to pass. So, but that's yet to be seen.
Just the fact that it got this far, though, really worrisome.
Yeah.
I mean, because when you look at the worldview of USA in general, I mean, they don't say, oh, you are all than the rest of the U.S. They're going to clump this all together. But passing is kind of discriminatory and extremely, I don't know.
Well, there are. I will tell you this: in the United States, we do have a little bit of that stigma. You Arizonans, oh, in Arizona, oh, you know, and it's like, okay. Oh man, we've got some weird ones, that's for sure. Charlie.
Well, the other interesting thing about all of this is I remember having a conversation with several of my friends who just passed through, I believe, what was it, the state house, and they're like, oh no, it's not going to pass the Senate. And then it passed the Senate as well. So it's just like, that's where I get really worried too. I share your concern that if it got this far, it might not be.
My concern is that they're spending so much time on religious issues. I mean, shouldn't we be spending more time on education issues and economic issues within the state? That's kind of my concern. It's like, you know, do you really have more time to spend on things like this? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Separation church and state.
There you go. Okay, now let's move forward. Let's move forward into today's discussion. Oh, Brandon.
I was going to say they try to pass the same. I'm not going to school, so they try to do the, you know, where they can pull anybody over.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah,
They're
that's
just
bad.
basically that's where.
Yeah, for a second.
Now they're aiming it towards other people. Before it was, you know, people that look suspicious, you know.
Yeah,
aliens.
I often wonder if you know, during that law passed, did I look suspicious or do I look suspicious? It's an interesting point. Now, let's move forward. Let's move on. I want to ask you a couple of questions. Why are communist countries, former communist countries, I should say, the Eastern Bloc countries, we're talking about Latvia, we're talking about Estonia, we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking about these countries, why are they having such a difficult time adopting capitalism? Why are they having such a difficult time conforming and adopting to capitalism? Mr. Green.
That would be like us trying to convert to socialism. There's a lot of people that have stigmas against just the concept of it, let alone actually having a form of not just government system, but the way that we handle businesses, the way we get finances, all those other things. Trying to stick with something that you haven't really done before on country level or national level.
Building a whole new infrastructure, right, isn't the easiest thing. Somebody else had a comment in the back row. Go ahead.
Kind of on the same lines, but I believe materialism and countries not really of that sort aren't really.
Okay, materialism, you know, that could be some part of it. They're not totally familiar with, we'll say, capitalism. That's part of it also. Anybody else have any other ideas, any other thoughts? Go ahead.
parents lived in Russia for 6 years. They said there was so much corruption at the higher ranks, and every time they were allotted big money to buy natural raw materials, the managers squandered the money away.
So there's corruption, right? Quite a bit of corruption. Go ahead.
Still got those old commies in business.
You got the old commies in business.
They're not going away.
They're not going away. They haven't yet kicked the bucket, and they're finding that their old relationships may be a benefit to them, right? What are relationships called in China, by the way? Guangxi. There you go. Good job. Good job. Okay. I'm gonna tell you it's about, number one, property rights. And we've talked a little bit about this. I believe this is one of the primary reasons that make the United States great, is property rights. And the question here was why former communist countries are having difficulty adopting capitalism. Now, tell me a little bit about property rights. Well, tell me what kind you're thinking of, any kind. Why is it that property rights, why would I say that property rights are one of the primary reasons why the United States is great? Is what makes us great. Go ahead.
Because we can protect our property. Somebody else has to come up with a new idea. So it's like innovation.
There you go. Actually, what was the name again? Gabe. Gabe is right. But in China they can protect their property also. Sometimes. When they feel like it. Excellent. It's the enforcement issue. Right? And Gabe was alluding to that. In the United States, property, and we're not just talking about physical property. We're not just talking about land. We're not just talking about a building. What we're talking about is intellectual property, IP. Okay? We're talking about IP. Intellectual property is protected and enforced. Those protections are enforced. If you create something, which we'll call innovation, and someone in the United States copies it, and you have already filed a patent or a trademark or a copyright, you have legal recourse, legitimate legal recourse. And thus you are protected. You are protected from keystone competitors very often. Go ahead.
We're talking about Apple doing it in China. Apple's actually suing China to go into their patent rights industry. So they're like, why should they go in there and then you just start, in China?
And China has some of the strictest property right language in the world. It's the enforcement of it. When they want to enforce it. An example, when I was over there in 2008, the Olympics were just about ready to start, and I think I told you about this, they had a mascot, a set of mascots. And the Chinese government basically said, look, no one is going to infringe and counterfeit or copy these Olympic doodads without our permission. That's way too high, though. Period. The iron fist showed itself, and I honestly believe no one infringed on those doodads. It's the enforcement of it when it is convenient for the Chinese government to enforce a law. That's when they do it. When it's convenient for them, when it's within their interest to do it. Right now, with Apple in China, it's not within the Chinese government's interest to enforce any patent protection. Is there? No, not at all. How about missing information? Missing information. And by this, we're talking about no legal enforcement. There's no real legal path. And we talked about some of these Eastern European countries enacting what we call improv democracy. Improv democracy. Have you ever been to a comedy show or seen a comedy show where they are given a couple of words and they just got acted out right then and there? Improvise.
Whose line is it anyway?
Yeah, whose line is it anyway? Improv democracy, on the fly. They're just making it up as they go. That's what a lot of these Eastern European countries are doing. We talked a little bit about this. Corruption. Corruption. And I'm also going to put very informal culture. This is what we call extra-legal. Extra-legal does not mean it's super legal. It actually means it is outside of legal parameters. Outside of legal parameters. So these informal dealings are going on outside of the legal framework.
Would an example of that be like Dick Cheney approving KBR?
Yes, no, yes.
An example of Dick Cheney doing what?
Having Halliburton and KBR go to be the number one
Oh
contract.
yeah, how convenient was that? Having Halliburton be the primary winner of the defense contracts or the government contracts in Iraq and Kuwait and all those. I don't want to implicate the United States, but that certainly could be an argument. You certainly could make an argument for that. I would say that I think he would want to defend himself in that case, but nonetheless, that is actually a pretty decent example. Here we are talking about Eastern Bloc countries. Yeah, well, we have different. I'm one of those individuals that believes that the rule of law, you should follow. I think Dick Cheney may have overstepped or may have used his power to have gotten some of these contracts. No question about it. All right. What does this all mean? What does this all mean? If you don't have strong property rights, if you don't have any real good legal enforcement against wrongs that were done, and you don't even have a deterrent. So even if you do have the legal framework, like China does, they're not enforcing it. So there's no real threat. So you've created a culture that is allowed to break the rules without any fear of repercussions. And then you've got a very extra legal, informal way of doing business, under the table we'll call it. This essentially leads to huge disparities in wealth, which is what, coming full circle, we're talking about the Ukraine, which is what the Ukraine is experiencing right now. And this is also part of, many of you have heard, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring started in Egypt, Libya, has moved around where the individuals, we'll say the common citizen, were tired of the wealth disparity and the corruption and decided to revolt. Saudi Arabia was in fear and still is in fear of another Arab Spring rising, in the sense that there is a large disparity between the very, very wealthy and the less fortunate, we'll say. When you have this kind of disparity, your capital tends to die. The velocity of money tends to slow down because people realize in other countries, that investing into that country could mean that your capital is going to die also. Let me give you another real-world, real-time example. Right now, China is halting much of their foreign direct investment, much of their FDI going into Brazil. They were rearing to go and have spent billions of dollars investing into Brazilian infrastructure projects, projects that Chinese companies were hoping they would win. And now I just read yesterday in the Financial Times that China is saying, hey, you know what? It's too difficult to do business down there. These Brazilians aren't awarding the contracts that they promised us. They're not giving those contracts up. There's too much corruption, possibly, which would be somewhat of a ironic statement coming from China. But nonetheless, when you have a lack of transparency and lack of real property rights and property right enforcement in very informal ways of doing business, capital tends to slow way down. The flow of funds, and we are students in this class and beyond this class of the flow of funds. Where is the money going and why? Or why not? In this case, the velocity of money has decreased significantly. You had a question back there. Yeah, so the disparity of wealth of 1%ers, I mean, there's issues in the United States regarding that, but our issues compared to what's going on in, say, Saudi Arabia or the wealth disparity in the Ukraine or in Russia, it's nothing. Our wealth disparity is nothing close to that. I believe in the Ukraine it's something like, or in Russia, 17% of the country is considered, you know, the aristocracy in the sense of funds and money. They're responsible for 98% or 99% of the wealth, something like that. And that's a pretty big number. And then everybody else is left to, you know, fend for themselves. They're not a large middle class. And that seems to be an ongoing battle, no matter what political state you're in. But these are key components that I want you to remember when you're looking at launching your business or your company internationally. Now, in the U.S., businesses benefit from IP, intellectual property. They benefit from democracy. They benefit from the enforcement of the laws. And here we have the velocity of money ever increasing. Seems like as soon as it slows down, it's already on its way back up. And this is because of innovation. This is really, truly, in my mind, because of innovation. We want to continue. We want to continue to dream. And dream is such a powerful, potent thing. Now, let's take a look at the democratization. We've looked at this before. In the center here, we have the U.S. citizens. And this is a wheel. And over here on this spoke, this is the old hub and spoke. Wow. Over here we have finance. Over here we have technology. Who can tell me what the last one was? We've gone over this before. The democratization of finance, of technology, and information. Excellent, Mr. Leggett. Is it Leggett? Love it. Excellent. Excellent. Democratization of finance, technology, and information. What this allows, when you have the freedom, the liberalization of finance, and you have the ability to freely read whatever it is that you want, and you have the technology available to your citizens will do the heavy lifting. The result is they will do the heavy lifting. They will want to bring the blood, sweat, and tears to the marketplace. That is the result of this diagram. You need to be aware of this. No one ever drowned from their own sweat equity. Right? No one ever drowned from their own sweat equity. The result of a strong financial system, available technology and information. And just think, we came this close, putting this in a real world context, we came this close last fall to defaulting on our debt, which would have completely, you would have gotten a flat tire right here in the U.S. As the wheel spins around, it's going to hit that spot. We came this close to defaulting on our debt. Fantastic. And I say the word fantastic in the most wildly imaginative scenario that I could not believe was happening. We came this close to defaulting on our debt. And yet again, in the last few weeks, we had a big uprising or storm regarding the debt, yet again, the debt ceiling. Now, although we didn't come as close, it certainly is an issue. Certainly is an issue, and it is an issue that needs to be discussed. Default should not be part of that discussion. That's all I'm saying. Am I happy? Am I pro raising the debt ceiling for no reason? No. But I tell you this, I am very much against defaulting on our debt. Very much against to prove a point, if you will. Certainly don't believe that that would affect the interests of our economy. Now, we've talked about entering a new market. And these are strategies to enter a new market. So we just talked about some of the pitfalls and some of the things that you need to be aware of in other countries. You need to be aware of their intellectual property laws. You need to be aware of their enforcement or lack thereof. You need to be aware of all of these topics because that has a direct relation to your sales. And let's just say you've gone through and you decided, I'm going to go ahead and enter India or Solomon Islands, or I'm going to go ahead and enter Germany or the Czech Republic. When launching into a new market, you need to ask yourself, number one, is this the right culture for our product or business? And by that I mean, do you have the ability to work within that culture? So you might take baby steps. So if you're in the United States, you may say, you know, given that the laws are very similar in the United Kingdom or in Canada and they speak English, maybe I'll launch into an English-speaking country first. You may not be fully ready to launch into, say, a market in India just yet. Go with the low-hanging fruit. Go with the low-hanging fruit. You need to ask yourself, what do we outsource? Do we have separate distributors? And what's the other term I'm looking for here? Marketers. Excellent. What is the competition doing? Now, I think some of you may not be aware of this, but how many of you are aware of Zycam? What Zycam is, that nasal pulse spray. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I funded that company. That was my baby. I funded that company out of an empty warehouse in South Phoenix. We were able to procure, we were able to track over the former chief food technology officer from Nabisco. And he became the CEO and created Zycam. And Zycam, when it launched, it was an unbelievable launch for a small company competing in such a red ocean. And beyond my wildest dreams. And at the end of like 3 or 4 years, it was doing about 130 million in revenue. Phenomenal number. And I took that company public. I did some of the financing, the early stages, did the financing, I did the bridge loans, did the private placements, I did the initial public offering, and took them public. And after 3 or 4 years, they went from like a couple of million in sales to like 135 million in revenue. A very short period of time. And I recognize, though, that this product should be global. The CEO, the original CEO that we brought over from Nabisco, he left. He had some other things, and other challenges that he wanted to tackle in his life. So he left while on top. I went to the new management and I said, listen, this product needs to launch internationally. We're not going international. We're concentrating on the U.S. growth. And I submitted a proposal, a very compelling proposal. I didn't want to argue with him. I just wanted to give him the reasons why. And I failed, and that was my failure. I should have told him what was going to happen if he didn't. And instead I was giving him all the reasons why he should, which he was deaf to. Let that be a note to you, by the way. Some of you are paying attention to that. The reality of it is, in international business, that large keystone competitors are going to launch their own version of your product if you don't. And that's exactly what happened in Zycam, in Europe and in Asia. After 5 or 6 years of not launching in a foreign country, I think it was Merck or some other large pharmaceutical company decided that they were going to launch their own version of Zycam in the EU and in Asia. Large keystone competitors will launch their own version if you don't. Be very, very aware of this. So when I say, what is the competition doing? You had better be aware of what they are going to do if you aren't. Back to the point that you were reading between the lines with, I just want to make this clear. Sometimes presenting the obvious opportunity in international business isn't going to get you anywhere. Sometimes you need to present what you're going to lose if you don't. Does that make sense? And the reason why Zycam didn't launch internationally, I gave all of the best and brightest reasons and correct reasons. And it was a compelling argument, well defended. I blame myself that they didn't launch internationally because I failed to tell them what they would lose if they didn't. Now, the reality of it is their hierarchy, their CEO is to blame for not doing it. But I blame myself in the sense that I knew better. I knew I should have proposed something a little bit different. In an international business, when you are talking about going into a new market or a new country, that makes people nervous. And the opportunity in itself does not always answer the questions of risk. You're going to have to define that. You're going to have to give what I call a failure analysis. We'll go into that later on. But a failure analysis essentially tells you what you're going to lose. And in this case, these other keystone competitors launched Zycam in Europe and in Asia, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars. That is money left on the table. That CEO of Zycam left money on the table. Hundreds of millions of dollars. International business And the reason why I believe he didn't go international is because he didn't know. And he didn't know whether you should do a joint venture first, if you should have a dedicated team or not. He didn't know any of the things that you've already been taught. And you're going to run into individuals that are going to give you pushback or say no because they don't understand what you already have learned. It's going to be up to you to present those cases. Number 5, are we managing our resources and what are resources? Tell me what resources are.
Raw material.
Efficiently. Raw materials, what else? People, labor, people, capital, absolutely, excellent. Yes, time is our most valuable resource. I wish we had more of it.
Don't we all?
Number 6. And this is a big one. Are we playing the scale game or channel game? Now, I want you to think about this. Because when you decide to go international, you're going to have a decision to make. Are you going to play the scale game or the channel game? Scale game or the channel game? Let me define this for you. On one side, you have the blue ocean, and the other side you have the what? Red ocean. You have the red ocean. This is the scale game over here. And this is the channel game over here. When you're doing the red ocean, and you're doing the scale game, this is what we would call also a frontal attack. You're hitting the market hard, right between the eyes, which means that you better have, well, what is it that red ocean companies have that blue ocean companies don't? Economies of scale, what else? Come on. Sourcing, what is it? Source resources, absolutely. People, money, distribution, etc. So here we're talking about they're going after market share, right? Right away. They want to be a known commodity immediately. And they have resources, as Hamad said. Absolutely correct. Now, on the blue ocean side of things, we're going to do what's called an oblique attack. An oblique attack is really coming at it from the side or under the radar. Not necessarily for the customers. You want to be under the radar for customers, but you want to be under the radar when it comes to your competitors. Okay? And this is all about, going back to Thursday's class, mind share. And what did we say that mind share was? What did we say that mind share was?
Awareness.
I have it in my notes. I must not have gotten that far. Mind share is knowledge. Wow, I almost had a coup d'etat. Mind share, knowledge of the market. And we're going to go in with the JV. What's JV stand for again? Joint venture. Thank you. And we're going to try to connect with the culture. Let's go back to the original question. Are you playing the channel game, which is the blue ocean, or are you playing the scale game? A lot less expensive to go the channel route, but at the same time, you might not be getting all of the customers that you want. But you may be efficiently deploying capital. You may be efficiently utilizing your resources. You may be able to connect with the consumers even more because you have to. You have to make a decision. You have to absolutely make a decision. Are you going to play the scale game or are you going to play the channel game? If you work for Intel, you might be playing the scale game. If you work for Tom's Shoes, you're probably going to be playing the channel game. But you need to make the distinction. You need to know which one. You need to even be aware of the two and then which one you're going to do. Charlie?
Now, as a result of this, is it usually common that scale game is performed only by people, or only by companies which have a large infrastructure, and then channel game is only done by those that have a smaller infrastructure?
It's true. So Charlie has a good point. Well, Senor Chavez, isn't it true that companies with large infrastructures would naturally play the scale game, and companies with small infrastructures would naturally play the channel game? And that is somewhat true. But I personally believe that playing the channel game probably 8 out of 10 times is going to be the best way, whether you're a large company or not, because you need to acculturate yourself with that market, with those people, or else you get Kentucky Fried Chicken launching into China with their slogan of finger licking good, and it translating literally to, well, eat your fingers off. Or Nova, Chevy Nova launching into Latin America. Yeah. You know, my first car was a 1969 Chevy Nova, but it was the four-door, and everybody used to come up and say, "Wow," they didn't see the four-door, they go, "Oh, it was a two-door, it actually was." Thank you. Nonetheless, you get red ocean companies that just throw money at things, and they end up not acculturating themselves, and you get companies like Pepsi with their slogan, what was it? The generation, bring the generation life, and the translation, the literal translation. What's that?
Bring your ancestors back.
Bring your ancestors back from the dead. You know, I really believe that 8 out of 10 times probably implementing the channel game is going to be the most effective way for you to enter a new market. Now, let's talk about some barriers to entry. So we just talked about some strategies. Let's talk about some barriers to entry. This is barriers to entry into a country. What we're talking about, obviously. And there are two types of barriers that you need to be aware of. There are company barriers, your own internal infrastructure barriers, and then there are also individual barriers. And we're going to call those customer barriers. Now, I have appropriately given you cream and fruit, consistent with my pastry habit. Company barriers. When launching into a new country, capital. Be aware of how much money you have. This is a huge one, regulatory. It could take a couple of years for you to launch into a country if you don't have the right relationships. And we call that what? ROR. Excellent. ROR. In China, they call that what? Guangxi. Excellent. Expertise. This is you having a dedicated team. Access to market. This is significant. You know, take a look at India. 1.2 billion people. Infrastructure-wise, it's not that readily available for you to attack the market. The infrastructure is not there all throughout India. So do you have access to the markets that you're trying to get into infrastructure-wise? And then manufacturing. Where is it that you're doing manufacturing? Is it, let's take a look at Honda or Toyota. They have manufacturing facilities here in the United States. It's the proximity to market. Instead of having them manufactured in Japan or other countries, they're manufactured here because they're sold here right away. Now, on the customer side, you need to be aware of how functional your product is perceived. Now, function, I'm not a big fan of the word function. I'm more of a fan of the word of benefits. And so if you take the price over performance, you'll get the benefits. I'm not a big fan of the word functional. Never have. Customers are also looking at risk. Can they get hurt utilizing your widget? Utility or usage. Do they really need it? Do they really need it? And this is one of those things I want you to think about. Macintosh computer, the computer made by Apple. Steve Jobs knew that the market needed a computer that people could utilize and use within 1 hour. You didn't have to take a class. You could open that thing up, and after 1 hour of learning how to use it, you were off to the races. They needed that. Usage should be equated with need. What's the image that it's going to portray? One of the companies that I was helping to launch in India was making a personal lubricant, kind of like, you know, KY jelly. And there was no category in India for a personal lubricant. Moreover, advertising a personal lubricant in India was a very risky thing. So when people buy that for fear of being categorized as some, you know, sexual maniac, truly, those were the fears. What's the image? Things have changed, believe it or not, in 5 years. Last one, tangible benefits. it didn't actually, it got through all the regulatory, but the larger retailers were having a very difficult time trying to figure out how to promote a personal lubricant in India. And so I suggested we wait a few years until somebody like KY enters the market and advertise. They're in that waiting stage now. Charlie.
Now, how often is it that is a viable strategy for gaining market share if you're a startup and you're waiting for some larger name like KY or like Best Buy or something to enter the market?
It's a great question. The thing about it is, let somebody else that has the money, and my thinking was this, let somebody else that has the money take the risk in building that bridge so that it's not considered a taboo product. And as a startup, it would be very difficult for you to actually change the cultural mindset. And so essentially, that was the reasoning, that was the feeling, and that's what ended up happening. And each market needs to be evaluated. You know, I flew to India presenting these products to Reliance and these other larger retailers, and they absolutely saw the need, but culturally it was very difficult for them to wrap their head around how they were going to market the product. Still a very, very conservative society. And so nonetheless, every country, every marketplace needs to be evaluated on its own. With that said, I want another very vibrant discussion on Thursday. I want to know what's happening in the world. I want to know what's going on. I want to see some discussion board threads before Thursday. I want to see what you guys are thinking and talking about.